The Frozen Silence, the true story of the Franklin expedition. The Arctic did not kill men quickly. It waited. It watched ships drift into silence. It swallowed sound beneath snow and ice. It turned confident explorers into ghosts wandering through endless white emptiness, while the world thousands of miles away still believed they were heroes on the verge of glory. In 1845, two of the most advanced ships on Earth disappeared into the Arctic while searching for the Northwest Passage, a CRO. The men aboard those ships carried enough food for years. They had steam engines. They had books, silverware, heating systems, scientific instruments, and the confidence of the British Empire behind them. And then they vanished. For years, nobody knew what happened. No survivors returned. No messages arrived. No wreckage floated home. Only rumors survived. Whispers from Inuit hunters. Skeletons found frozen beside abandoned boats. Human bones marked with knife cuts. Camps where starving men had boiled leather and scraped marrow from shattered bones. The disappearance of Sir John Franklin's expedition became one of the greatest mysteries in human exploration history. What truly happened in the Arctic was worse than anyone imagined, and the ice preserved its secrets for more than 170 years. Long before airplanes crossed the globe in hours and cargo ships moved through the Panama Canal, the world's most powerful empires were obsessed with one question: could there be a faster route to Asia? Europe wanted wealth, silk, tea, spices, gold, power. The traditional trade routes around Africa were long and dangerous. If Britain could discover a northern sea route cutting across the top of North America, it could dominate global trade forever. This mythical route became known as the Northwest Passage. For centuries, explorers died searching for it. Ships vanished in storms. Men froze. Entire crews disappeared into Arctic darkness. But the dream refused to die. By the 1800s, Britain ruled the seas. The Royal Navy possessed unmatched confidence and technological superiority. Explorers were treated like celebrities. Their names appeared in newspapers across Europe and America. And one man seemed perfect for the greatest Arctic expedition ever attempted: Sir John Franklin. Franklin was already famous. He had survived disastrous earlier expeditions. On one journey through northern Canada, starvation became so severe that some men reportedly resorted to cannibalism. Franklin himself earned the grim nickname, "the man who ate his boots," because of the leather consumed during starvation. But survival made him legendary. By 1845, Franklin was 59 years old, older, heavier, less energetic than younger explorers. Yet the British Admiralty trusted him. And so Britain prepared an expedition unlike anything the Arctic had ever seen. Two ships would lead the mission: HMS Erebus, HMS Terror. The names sounded almost supernatural. Both ships were former bomb vessels built for war. Their hulls were reinforced with thick wood and iron plating, strong enough to resist crushing ice. They were upgraded with steam engines taken from railway locomotives. They carried heated cabins, a massive library, scientific laboratories, thousands of preserved food cans. To the public, the expedition looked invincible. Officers dined with silver utensils. The crews carried musical instruments. Some sailors even brought pet monkeys and birds. The ships left England in May 1845 to cheering crowds. Families waved goodbye from shore. Newspapers celebrated the mission. Nobody realized they were watching 129 men disappear forever. The expedition first stopped in Greenland. Whaling ships encountered the two vessels there during the summer of 1845. The crews appeared healthy, confident, relaxed. Letters were sent home. Fresh supplies were loaded. Then the ships sailed westward into the Arctic. That was the last time Europeans ever saw the men alive. After entering Baffin Bay, the expedition vanished. At first, nobody worried. Arctic exploration could take years. Ice trapped ships regularly. Communication was impossible. But by 1847, concerns spread across Britain. Still no word, no sightings, nothing. Franklin's wife, Lady Jane Franklin, became relentless. She pressured the government. She funded searches. She wrote letters. She transformed the missing expedition into a national obsession. Search missions soon flooded the Arctic. British ships, American ships, private expeditions, whalers, explorers. The search for Franklin became one of the largest rescue operations in history. But the Arctic gave almost nothing back. Only silence. Then the first clues began appearing. Search teams exploring Beechey Island in 1850 discovered 3 graves. Simple graves, neatly organized. The names belonged to members of Franklin's crew. John Torrington, William Brain, John Hartnell. All had died during the expedition's first winter. At first glance, the graves suggested discipline and order. The crews had carefully buried their dead. But the discoveries raised terrifying questions. Why had healthy young sailors died so early? And where were the others? The expedition had vanished without leaving major traces. Over the years, more search parties uncovered scattered evidence. A spoon here, a boot there, abandoned camps, pieces of wood, human remains. Then came stories from Inuit communities. Inuit hunters described seeing starving white men dragging boats across ice. Some reportedly collapsed and died while marching south. Others behaved strangely. One Inuit account described desperate sailors falling into snow and simply refusing to rise again. Another described bodies scattered across the land. European investigators initially dismissed many Inuit testimonies. That would prove to be a terrible mistake, because the Inuit knew the Arctic better than anyone alive. And they were telling the truth. In 1859, explorer Francis McClintock discovered the most important clue of all. Inside a stone cairn on King William Island, searchers found a written message. It became known as the Victory Point Note. At first, the note sounded optimistic. It stated that Franklin's ships had wintered successfully. Everything appeared under control. But around the edges of the document, another message had later been squeezed into the margins. The tone had completely changed. The ships had become trapped in ice. They had been stuck for nearly 2 years. Sir John Franklin was dead. 24 officers and crew members were already gone. The surviving men had abandoned the ships. More than 100 exhausted sailors were attempting to march south across brutal Arctic terrain. The note ended abruptly. No explanation, no details, no ending. Just a horrifying realization. The most advanced expedition in British history had collapsed into disaster. And somewhere beyond the ice, more than 100 men had vanished while trying to survive. Modern experts now believe the surviving crew abandoned Erebus and Terror in April 1848. This decision alone reveals how hopeless conditions had become. Sailors almost never abandoned ships in the Arctic. A ship meant shelter, warmth, supplies, hope. But the ice had imprisoned the vessels. The men were likely starving, sick, weak, possibly poisoned. So they began dragging heavy sledges loaded with supplies across frozen wilderness. Imagine the scene. Over 100 exhausted men hauling lifeboats over jagged ice while freezing winds cut through their clothing. No trees, no roads, no rescue, only endless white emptiness stretching to the horizon. Many sailors were already ill. Later studies suggested the expedition suffered from severe lead poisoning. The canned food used by the expedition had been poorly sealed with lead solder. The ships also had lead water pipes. Lead poisoning can cause confusion, weakness, mental deterioration, and physical collapse. Some historians believe the men slowly lost their ability to think clearly. At the same time, scurvy may have destroyed their health. Vitamin deficiencies caused bleeding gums, weakness, and joint pain. Starvation followed. The Arctic offered little food to men unfamiliar with survival techniques. The Inuit hunted seals, built snow shelters, adapted clothing, understood migration patterns. Franklin's crews relied heavily on European methods and preserved food, and the Arctic punished every mistake. Search parties later discovered terrifying evidence of the collapse. One boat found on a sledge contained skeletons and bizarre objects, fine silverware, books, soap, heavy equipment. The sailors had carried luxury items while struggling to survive. Why? Perhaps discipline remained strong. Perhaps officers believed civilization still mattered. Perhaps nobody accepted how desperate the situation had become. But those heavy objects slowed them. Every pound mattered, and one by one, the men died. For decades, Victorian Britain refused to accept certain possibilities. British naval officers were viewed as symbols of honor and discipline. The idea that Franklin's men may have resorted to cannibalism horrified the public. But evidence kept growing. Inuit witnesses described seeing human remains butchered for food. European investigators initially rejected the claims as exaggerations. Then scientists began examining bones recovered from the Arctic. Cut marks appeared on human skeletons. Bones had been broken open, exactly the way hunters break animal bones to extract marrow. Some remains showed polishing consistent with boiling. The conclusion became unavoidable. At least some members of the expedition had resorted to cannibalism during the final stages of starvation. It was not savagery. It was desperation. The Arctic reduces civilization to survival. The men who left England with silver plates and military pride eventually reached a point where eating the dead became the only possible chance to stay alive. And even that was not enough. No one survived. More than a century later, the Arctic revealed another shocking secret. In the 1980s, researchers exhumed the graves on Beechey Island. The frozen ground had preserved the bodies with terrifying detail. When the coffins were opened, the faces of the dead sailors still looked recognizable. Eyebrows, hair, skin. John Torrington's body became especially famous. His expression appeared almost peaceful beneath the ice. Scientists performed autopsies. The findings were disturbing. Extremely high lead levels appeared in the tissues. The sailors were physically deteriorating long before the expedition's final collapse. Researchers also found signs of pneumonia and malnutrition. The expedition had likely been unraveling from the very beginning. And yet, the ships continued deeper into the Arctic trap. Historians still debate exactly why Franklin's expedition collapsed so completely. Several disasters may have struck at once. 1. Lead poisoning. The canned food and water systems exposed crews to dangerous levels of lead. Mental confusion and physical weakness could have crippled decision-making. 2. Scurvy and malnutrition. Even preserved food was not enough to maintain health over years trapped in ice. 3. Brutal ice conditions. The Arctic climate during the expedition may have been unusually severe. Ships became trapped in thick pack ice with no escape. 4. Cultural rigidity. British naval tradition may have prevented adaptation. The Inuit survived Arctic conditions using flexible methods developed over generations. Franklin's crews relied on European systems that failed in polar extremes. 5. Overconfidence. Britain believed technology could conquer nature. The Arctic proved otherwise. In many ways, Franklin's expedition represented the collision between imperial confidence and the raw indifference of the natural world. And nature won. The disappearance captured the imagination of the entire world. Newspapers published theories constantly. Some believed survivors still lived among Inuit communities. Others imagined hidden camps waiting for rescue. Songs were written, paintings created, books published. Lady Jane Franklin became one of the most determined campaigners in exploration history. She spent years pushing governments and private explorers to continue searching. Without her persistence, much of the evidence may never have been discovered. The Franklin mystery influenced generations of explorers. Even American expeditions joined the search. In some strange way, the missing ships became symbols larger than the men themselves. They represented courage, ambition, tragedy, human obsession, and the terrifying idea that entire groups of people can simply vanish into the unknown. To understand the psychological horror of Franklin's expedition, you must imagine an Arctic winter. Not a modern winter with heated homes and electricity, a true polar winter. Darkness lasting for months, no sunrise, no warmth, no birds, no color. Only black skies and endless ice illuminated by weak lanterns. The ships would groan constantly as shifting ice crushed against the hulls. Temperatures plunged far below freezing. Frost formed inside cabins. Men developed insomnia, depression, paranoia, and exhaustion. Some likely believed rescue would never come. And yet discipline had to continue. Officers organized routines, theaters, music, exercises, religious services, anything to preserve morale. But year after year, the ice never released the ships. Imagine hearing the same sounds every day. Wind, ice cracking, coughing, the footsteps of dying men. Then silence. More silence than most humans can psychologically endure. The Arctic does not merely freeze the body, it attacks the mind. The Franklin expedition was not composed of amateurs. These were trained Royal Navy sailors. Many had survived previous wars and expeditions. Some were teenagers, others hardened veterans. They came from different backgrounds: poor laborers, experienced seamen, educated officers, scientists, carpenters, blacksmiths, cooks. One sailor brought a monkey aboard. Another carried books. Some kept journals. These were living people with families waiting at home. Many had wives, children, parents. In England, families waited years for news. Some refused to believe the men were dead. Mothers stared at harbor entrances, hoping to see returning ships. Wives preserved letters. The emotional damage stretched across continents. The expedition's disappearance became a wound that never fully healed. Sir John Franklin himself became a complicated historical figure. Some viewed him as a hero. Others blamed him for the catastrophe. Critics argued he was too old, too rigid, too dependent on traditional methods. Supporters believed no leader could have survived those conditions. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Franklin represented an age of exploration, driven by national pride and imperial ambition. The British Empire believed it could master any environment. But the Arctic was not impressed by medals or titles. Ice treated admirals and common sailors the same way. Franklin died sometime in June 1847. The exact cause remains unknown. His body has never been found. Somewhere beneath Arctic ground or ice, the famous explorer disappeared into history. For generations, the ultimate mystery remained unsolved. Where were Erebus and Terror? The Arctic is enormous. Ice shifts constantly. Shipwrecks vanish beneath freezing waters. Decades turned into more than a century. Many believed the ships would never be found. Then modern technology changed everything. In 2014, researchers finally discovered HMS Erebus beneath Arctic waters. The ship was astonishingly well preserved. Cold water slows decay. Doors, windows, cabins, equipment. The ghost ship rested silently on the ocean floor after nearly 170 years, Then, in 2016, HMS Terror was also found, even more remarkably preserved. The discovery shocked historians. Some windows remained intact. Furniture survived. It looked as though the crew had only recently vanished. The ships had become time capsules frozen beneath the sea. The Arctic had hidden them for generations. Now the world could finally begin reconstructing the expedition's final days. One of the most important lessons from the Franklin story involves the Inuit. For decades, European investigators underestimated indigenous testimony. That was a major mistake. The Inuit possessed extraordinary Arctic knowledge. They understood ice behavior, animal migrations, weather patterns, survival methods. Many clues leading to the ships came directly from Inuit oral histories. Descriptions passed down across generations eventually helped modern researchers locate the wrecks. This changed historical understanding dramatically. The Franklin disaster was not simply a story about exploration. It was also a story about arrogance. European powers often ignored indigenous expertise, even in environments indigenous peoples had mastered for centuries. Had Franklin's crews adopted Inuit clothing, hunting techniques, and travel methods more fully, history might have unfolded differently. Modern people often underestimate starvation. It is not simply hunger. It transforms the body and mind. Victims become weak, confused, emotional, and exhausted. Muscles disappear. Thought processes slow. Decision-making collapses. The Franklin crews endured starvation while surrounded by frozen emptiness. Imagine watching supplies shrink day after day. Imagine seeing friends die. Imagine realizing rescue may never come. At some point, hope itself becomes dangerous, because hope encourages people to continue suffering. Some historians believe the final survivors wandered for weeks or months after abandoning the ships. One by one, they likely collapsed into snow. The Arctic preserves bodies for astonishing lengths of time. Some sailors may still remain frozen in remote regions never fully searched. Their final moments disappeared into the silence of the polar wilderness. The Franklin expedition revealed something deeper than exploration failure. It shattered the illusion of absolute human control. Victorian Britain believed science and technology could conquer nature. Steam engines, industrial power, naval superiority. But the Arctic exposed limits. The ships were advanced for their era, yet they still became helpless prisons trapped in ice. The expedition symbolized the dangers of overconfidence. Nature does not negotiate. It does not care about empires. The same civilization building factories and railroads still remained vulnerable to cold, hunger, darkness, and fear. This lesson echoes throughout history. Titanic, Everest, space disasters. Human ambition repeatedly collides with environments capable of destroying even the best preparations. The Franklin expedition continues influencing modern storytelling. Books, films, documentaries, television series. The combination of mystery and horror fascinates audiences. A vanished expedition trapped in darkness while men slowly die across frozen landscapes feels almost supernatural. Yet it truly happened. The real story is more disturbing than fiction because it involved ordinary humans facing unimaginable conditions. Some modern horror creators compare the Arctic to outer space. Both environments are cold, silent, hostile, isolated. In many ways, Franklin's men became astronauts of the 19th century. They entered an environment beyond normal human survival, and the world watched from far away, powerless to help. Ironically, despite its catastrophic ending, the Franklin expedition contributed valuable scientific knowledge. Maps improved. Arctic coastlines became better understood. Search missions charted massive unexplored regions. The obsession with finding Franklin pushed exploration farther than ever before. Many later expeditions succeeded partly because earlier crews paid with their lives. This pattern appears repeatedly in exploration history. Early disasters often create knowledge future generations use to survive. But such progress comes at terrible human cost. The Arctic is filled with graves, proving that exploration and tragedy often travel together. One question haunts historians more than any other. Who was the final survivor? Somewhere in the Arctic, one man likely watched the others die until he stood alone. Imagine that loneliness. No civilization, no rescue, no certainty. Just wind crossing frozen land. Did the last survivor keep walking? Did he stay near the ships? Did he write final thoughts nobody ever found? We do not know. But somewhere in that white emptiness, the final member of the Franklin expedition disappeared forever. The Arctic swallowed the last witness, and with him vanished countless details the world will never recover. The discoveries of Erebus and Terror opened new chapters of investigation. Underwater archaeologists carefully study the wrecks. Every object matters. A plate, a shoe, a handwritten note. These artifacts help reconstruct the final years aboard the ships. Robotic cameras move through dark corridors where sailors once walked carrying lanterns. Some cabins remain eerily intact. The wrecks feel haunted, not because of ghosts, but because of preservation. The cold Arctic waters stopped time. Researchers hope future discoveries may answer remaining mysteries. How long did crews survive aboard the trapped ships? Why did they abandon them? Did some men return later? Were there additional written records? Each new artifact adds another fragment to one of history's greatest puzzles. Franklin's disaster was part of a larger era of deadly exploration. During the 19th century, many expeditions vanished while nations competed for prestige and territory. Maps contained enormous blank spaces. Explorers became symbols of national pride. Governments celebrated courage while often underestimating risks. Men entered jungles, deserts, mountains, and polar regions where survival depended on luck as much as preparation. Some returned as heroes. Others disappeared completely. The Franklin expedition became the most famous because of its scale, mystery, and emotional impact. But behind every exploration story lies a harsh truth. Curiosity can be deadly. Human beings are driven to enter places that can destroy them. And sometimes the desire to know what lies beyond the horizon becomes stronger than fear itself. Why do humans risk everything for discovery? The Franklin expedition forces this question. The men knew Arctic voyages were dangerous. Previous expeditions had already suffered starvation, disease, and death. Yet they still volunteered. Some sought glory, others adventure. Some simply followed orders. Exploration promises immortality. History remembers names attached to discoveries. But exploration also feeds a deeper instinct. Humans are curious creatures. We look beyond mountains, across oceans, toward stars. Even when environments are deadly, curiosity pushes forward. Franklin's men entered the Arctic because people always want to know what exists beyond the unknown. That same instinct later sent humans into space. And like the Arctic explorers, astronauts travel through hostile emptiness where one mistake can mean death. The Arctic changes slowly. Objects remain preserved for astonishing periods. Wood survives. Bodies remain frozen. Clothing endures. Time itself feels different there. Many artifacts recovered from Franklin's expedition appear disturbingly recent. Shoes still recognizable. Fabric intact. Cabins preserved. The cold became a giant natural freezer, preserving a 19th century tragedy into the modern age. In warmer climates, the expedition might have vanished entirely, but Arctic ice held on to the evidence. And every few decades, melting conditions reveal new fragments. The story is still unfolding. The Franklin expedition teaches multiple lessons. Technology alone cannot guarantee survival. Arrogance toward nature is dangerous. Ignoring local expertise can be fatal. Preparation matters. Adaptation matters more. The disaster also reveals the thin line separating civilization from desperation. The officers who once attended formal dinners aboard elegant ships eventually struggled for survival across frozen wastelands. Human beings remain vulnerable no matter how advanced society becomes. And yet, there is also something deeply admirable in the expedition. The men endured unimaginable hardship. Even while starving and dying, many apparently maintained discipline and cooperation for years. Their courage does not erase mistakes, but it explains why the story continues captivating people nearly 2 centuries later. American audiences became especially fascinated with Franklin's story during the 20th and 21st centuries. Part of this fascination comes from survival culture. Americans admire resilience, adventure, frontier exploration. The Franklin expedition resembles a darker version of frontier mythology. A group of determined men enters hostile territory, believing skill and courage will triumph. Instead, the environment slowly destroys them. The story also appeals to modern audiences because it combines multiple genres at once: mystery, history, psychological horror, survival, science, archaeology. Few real historical events contain so many layers. And unlike fictional horror, every frozen grave and shattered bone belonged to real people. That reality makes the story unforgettable. The surviving crew likely hoped to reach trading posts far to the south, but the journey was nearly impossible. King William Island and surrounding regions are brutal even for experienced Arctic travelers. The men hauled boats loaded with supplies across rough terrain while weakened by illness. Some likely collapsed from exhaustion. Others may have drowned crossing icy waters. The march became slower and slower. Imagine looking around and realizing fewer people remain alive each week. Friends disappear. Footprints stop. Voices fade. The Arctic strips away entire human communities until only silence remains. And somewhere during that terrible march, the Franklin expedition ceased being an organized mission. It became scattered groups of starving survivors fighting for a few more days of life. Certain details recovered from the expedition feel almost surreal. A pair of silk handkerchiefs, books carried into the wilderness, a dressing gown, polished silver utensils engraved with officers' initials. Why did starving men drag such objects through Arctic wastelands? Perhaps the items represented hope, civilization, identity. Maybe abandoning them felt psychologically impossible. Historians also debate why so few written records survived. Naval expeditions usually produced detailed journals. Were records lost, destroyed, still hidden somewhere? Perhaps some documents remain trapped inside the wrecks. The possibility excites researchers even today, because somewhere inside a sealed cabin may rest pages capable of revealing the expedition's final secrets. The Franklin expedition no longer belongs only to Britain. It has become a global story. Canadians view it as part of Arctic history. Americans study it as one of the greatest exploration mysteries ever recorded. Scientists use it to understand survival and historical climate conditions. The story resonates because modern society still confronts unknown frontiers, deep oceans, space travel, artificial intelligence, extreme environments. Humans continue pushing boundaries despite risks. Franklin's disaster reminds us that progress often comes with consequences. Every age believes its technology has mastered danger, and every age eventually discovers limits. Perhaps the true main character of the story is the Arctic, not Franklin, not the ships, the environment. The Arctic is beautiful and terrifying simultaneously. Towering ice, frozen oceans, auroras dancing across black skies. But beneath that beauty lies lethal indifference. Tiny mistakes become fatal. Cold destroys equipment. Darkness damages mental health. Isolation weakens morale. The Franklin expedition entered one of the harshest environments on Earth during an era when survival technology remained primitive compared to modern standards. And once the ice trapped the ships, escape became nearly impossible. The Arctic did not attack the men aggressively. It simply waited, cold, patient, silent. Eventually, every human weakness emerged. Nearly 2 centuries later, the Franklin expedition still captures imaginations. Because deep down, people fear disappearance. We fear isolation, being forgotten, dying far from home. Franklin's men experienced all of those fears at once. Families never received proper goodbyes. Bodies vanished. Entire lives dissolved into Arctic silence. Yet the story also survives because humans admire those willing to confront the unknown. The expedition failed catastrophically, but the courage required to enter the Arctic in 1845 remains astonishing. Those sailors sailed toward regions where maps ended, and although the Arctic destroyed them, history never forgot them. The frozen silence preserved their memory. Even now, beneath dark polar waters, Erebus and Terror rest where the ice claimed them. Inside those wrecks linger echoes of voices that vanished long ago. Men laughing during early optimism, officers planning routes, sailors hoping to return home. Then years of fear, starvation, darkness, and finally, silence. The kind of silence only the Arctic can create. A silence so deep that held one of history's greatest mysteries for more than 170 years. And perhaps somewhere beneath ice not yet searched, another fragment of the story still waits. A journal, a skeleton, a final message. Proof that the lost men of the Franklin expedition never truly disappeared. The Arctic simply kept them hidden for a very, very long time.